Thanks for coming on, brother.
Mate, no worries. Thanks for having me.
Been a crazy week for you so far. Seen you've been launching your new hoodies. Did you decide what colour to go with, the white or the green?
Yeah, I've gone with both.
Okay.
I feel like the green might be off to a bit of a head start with popularity, but you got to have the options for people.
Awesome.
So I put the white male one in there because I quite like the white male. We'll see how we go overall, but yeah.
Before we get on to what's written on your T-shirt there, which says it's cool to cry for anyone that's listening and not watching the video, I sent a question to all my guests before they come on, and the question goes something along the lines of, if there was a majority of men wiped out and you, JD, had the opportunity to speak to whatever portion of men that were left and give whatever advice you could based off your life experiences, what is the advice you'd give? And the advice that you told me that you'd give was unlocking thoughts and changing attitudes around mental health. And so what I'd want to know is, why is that important to you, and what about your past enables you to talk about this?
Cool. Have I got the floor? Because this might take a minute.
Man, you take your time.
Nice. And I'll just, before I start, I'd like to point out that there's a few heavy things that I have to cover off at the start. So if you're in a bit of a headspace where this might not be for you and you need a break, maybe just take a pause and come and listen to it another time or watch it at another time. But 10 years ago, I was dating a girl called Ellie. And Ellie, she was young, social, vibrant, intelligent, loud, all the normal things for a typical 25-year-old girl. She had a great family, really supportive family, awesome group of friends. And in a matter of months, Ellie went from that person to not having the motivation to get out of bed. And Ellie was really sick and overcome with mental illness. And eventually Ellie died by suicide. So that then and there was when suicide was thrown into our backyard, and it wasn't something that was on the news. It wasn't something that happened to a friend of a friend. This was right on our doorstep, and it was obviously heartbreaking, confusing, shocking, sad, devastating, all of those things. And that kick-started two things, really. One was a fact-finding mission about what mental illness was, what suicide was, and trying to figure out what sort of things was going through Ellie's mind over that period where she went from being that person running around at the party, socializing, being with people, to being the person who couldn't get out of bed, couldn't leave the house, couldn't shower, and eventually taking her own life. And then it also, within this, the exploration of grief and what is grief and how to do it. But then on top of that, out of that exploration of grief came my own sort of kickstart to a mental health journey or exploration, we'll call it. And whilst I satisfied that knowledge in finding out what mental illness was and suicide was, I had prematurely halted grief. Because naturally after that, I was devastated, and I'd be crying in the car, I'd be crying in the shower, falling asleep, waking up. And one day, I remember this so vividly, is that I was getting ready for work and I saw a pair of Ellie's runners at the bottom of my closet, and I didn't cry because I said I was done with being sad. I didn't want that feeling anymore, that sick to your stomach feeling, the swelling jaw, the frog in the throat, obviously the tears and the uncontrollable hiccups that come with that crying. I didn't want that anymore, so I just said, no, I'm not having it. I don't want to be sad anymore. So I parked it. I didn't forget Ellie. She was always there. But I just stopped grieving her. And what I'd found over the years is that I had started to fall into patterns. And when I say years, I'm talking over a 5, 6, 7 year period that I saw myself going into patterns that I wasn't particularly liking. Because obviously you have to move on with your life. You can't grieve forever. You don't move on, you just move forward. But you can't grieve forever. So I was moved overseas. I got into new relationships and was living. And as this was all happening, I started seeing patterns in my life, especially patterns and interactions with romantic partners at work and close friends, is that I wasn't really loving who I was showing up as. And I was often angry. I was often, I'd often fly off the handle. I was hot-headed. And looking back on it, my state of being was like this. And I was going from ecstatic to erratic, or happy to angry, just bouncing like this and just bubbling along all the time, just waiting for something to happen. And then I'd erupt, and I would be having arguments, not discussions. And I'd always have to have the last say. Those sort of things that would make me treat those around me and myself unfairly. So these patterns kept going. And I finally, I put my hand up and didn't want to live with this anymore. So I went back to a therapist and started to tease some of these things out. And it took a long time. It took ages.
What's ages?
We're talking ages as in, it's not like a flick the switch on and you be sad again and you'll be right. It took a long time to back down from who I thought I was, which I just thought, this is who I am, and that's life. And as well as dealing with these patterns and this person who I was showing up as, I was also having these thoughts, these really unkind, showing no self-compassion to myself around these thoughts about who I was, or who I thought I was, and my future. So things like, you'll never be able to be calm. You'll never find peace. You'll never be able to be in a relationship and reciprocate love. Those sort of things that would just whiz around. And I was walking around with these thoughts thinking like, fuck, I hope they change. And maybe they'll change when this happens, and maybe they'll change when that happens, but I wasn't actually doing anything about the change. So with those two aspects, the person I was showing up as, and then these whirring thoughts that were never leaving, that was the awareness piece turned into action when I went back to therapy. So when you say ages, when something's in your head like that, days can feel like weeks can feel like months, because there's no relief. So this is like things I was working on about becoming like who I am now, or who I think I am now, and where the trajectory that I'm on. This would have taken, 1, 2, 3 years sort of thing for it to really calm itself down. And there were batches of therapy. I'd go in, not that I was treating it as a box ticking exercise, but more of like okay, I'm calm now. I think this is it. And then I would see the patterns come up again. Back into therapy I go and work on it over and over again. And then eventually I call it the silver bullet, but it wasn't. It was the body of work and the stuff that I'd been doing with the therapist, outside therapy, on myself, reading, podcasts, the works, was that I learned that emotions are all equal. They're not good or bad, and we need them all, and they're all natural. So once that happened, I let the sadness come back in, and I could feel that come back in, because when I would watch movies or hear sad stories or certain songs, sadness would well up and come back again. Anger never went away, but anger was now regulated and managed better. So rather than fly off the handle, say or do things that I would later regret, I would be able to take that emotion on board. Rather than let the flick be switched, I would regulate it, whether that would be through a breathing exercise or just counting down from 3. And so that obviously remained, and then the happiness and joy would continue. So rather than now being like this, it was a calmness that overwhelmed me. And immediately, like, there was weightlessness in my knees and shoulders. I wasn't anywhere near as tense, and I was behaving much more, let's just call it sensibly, but much more measured, felt like much more mature and far less exhausted without these thoughts of who are you, what are you going to do, you'll never be this, you'll never do that. And then also without this bubbling of anger or potential anger coming out, I became this person that was much more fluid with the way life was going and could bend with it, roll with the punches with it. So with these two things in mind, I was, preparing or launching out of a really unfortunate, heartbreaking circumstance, but coming out as a better person for it. And then during all of this, a friend's dad died from suicide. And I remember thinking that this is so confusing because we've got Ellie, who's young. She's finishing her career, female. Starting her career and she's female. Then we've got Matt, who's male, older, ended his career, and they're both dying from the same cause. What's going on? Like, I can't understand this. A car crash, maybe. But suicide, what is this? Because there are so many people on this diagonal aspect here and outside that would be affected. So then I'm like, I'm going to have to do something more now with what I've learned. And this is where I workshopped and brainstormed a lot of ideas to try and come up with something. And this is where It's Cool to Cry landed. And It's Cool to Cry, the long and the short of it, is making mental health cool. And that's not about getting a designer to mock up a great looking logo and putting it on trendy clothes. This is about making mental health more approachable. And if we make it more approachable, we can talk about it. And if we can talk about it, we get comfortable with it. And if we're comfortable with it, we get cool with it. And together we can make mental health cool. So there's a big push from me right now to get this clothing brand up and running and out to the masses, because we could be wearing this t-shirt down the street in line for a coffee at our next family dinner and be asked what that shirt means. And then instantly there's conversations humming around that table or in that line for a coffee about something which I view, and a lot of people out there view, which is really normal, and that's mental health. So I'm trying to get these conversations happening without the need for drinking, without the need for drugs, a crisis moment, or professional intervention, because we can have them with our family and friends for free. And they can really move the needle in terms of pushing through negative emotions, pushing through unhelpful thoughts and feelings. And as living proof, I know how beneficial it is to have all these emotions and respect them all and regulate them if need be.
So let's talk about mental health then, because obviously, there's some pretty interesting statistics, and I'm a statistics man. So I'll read out a couple that I looked into, and I know you already will know a lot of these, but 1 in 5 people suffer from mental illness. 43% of them have experienced it in their life. And the one that is interesting, 61% of men and 71% of women with depression or anxiety, like in 2017 reported, still having that feeling 4 years later, right? Even more interesting than that, the ones that seeked help and also got medication, 75% of those people still felt like they had a mental illness 4 years later. And I was fucking shocked. And so that obviously means, and then there's a lot that obviously comes from that. And one of the things I was thinking was, why is it that even sometimes seeking professional help, taking medications that are supposedly meant to help you, is this thing still going around and still like exponentially increasing? And so I wanted to ask your opinion on that. Why is it that you think that's happening? And is it because of our environment? Is it because we don't talk? Is it because we don't know how to talk? What do you think?
I think they're great questions, mate. If I had the absolute answer, we wouldn't be here. But let's just go with the obvious and easy ones. There's shame, there's judgment, there's a fear, and there's stigma. And I don't know how to break those things right now, but I know how I want to start, and that's by normalizing the conversations around mental health and how we're feeling. The stats also don't show the people that aren't talking about it or aren't reporting it. So they could be even worse than that, which is a funny thing to think about, is that, it's just all around us and we're not ready to talk about it, even though we know that some of the consequences are quite bad.
Can we clarify what mental illness is?
So the way I like to do this, and I don't try to complicate things. When I talk to people about mental health and mental illness, I really want to just clarify that it's very normal. Working on your mental health is very normal. And the way I like to do it, and the analogy that I use is that I draw a lot of against physical health and physical illness. So for example, we can work on our physical health to prevent physical illness. We can work on our mental health to prevent mental illness. So we can use diet and exercise to prevent, say, a heart attack. The same way we can be talking about our feelings and emotions to prevent mental ill health. So when I say mental health, the one I talk about that helps the most for me, and I personally think it does most of the heavy lifting when it comes to moving through unhelpful thoughts, is talking about what's going on in your mind and what's going on in your head. And I get asked a lot, how do we know when we need to talk about something? And I'd say to people, use the timeline tool, which is just a tool that you pluck timelines that you can live with things and can't live with things in your head. So it's 24 hours, 48 hours, or 1 week. How long do you want to sit with that thing bouncing around in your head before you actually need to move through it? So if there's something in your head for 24 hours and you can live with it, test it for 48. If you can live with it for 48, test it for 7. But if it gets to 7 days, then, and you still don't want it in your bouncing around in your head, then what are we doing to going to move through that? And I would more often not say that you can exercise, you can do your ice baths, you can do your meditations, but how do those activities there move the needle in terms of getting those emotions out there, talking to someone and addressing the root cause?
So then if you're going to speak to someone, right, and a lot of the barriers, like you said at the very beginning, guilt, shame, maybe lack of the right friends to speak to, there could be a number of factors that limit someone having these thoughts from actually going out and speaking about them. Mm-hmm. I remember speaking to you earlier about this and going, what's the best way to start this conversation? And also, how do you not be the victim of your own thoughts? Because they are your thoughts. Mm-hmm. And so that's also the other thing, because you get two ends of the extreme. You get the people that want to talk about it, and you get the people that almost play victim to everything that happens in their life.
Yeah. And
so is there a balance in which people can go about doing that?
It's a good question. I think when you said about thoughts, they are our thoughts and they are just our thoughts. We can't control them, so let them come and go, but don't let it define who you are. Mm. And then in terms of starting these conversations, I want to just do something now to help people have them, because we can get stuck in unhelpful thoughts around this and why we're not actually going to have them. So what I want to do now is create a platform using, again, physical health analogies where people know that they are allowed to talk about it. This is permission to go and talk about your shit because it's important. So there is a saying that goes, if you've got a sore knee, go get your knee checked. If you've got a sore mind, go get your mind checked. I think once upon a time that was really good for people to think like, okay, cool, I can go and talk about my mind just like I could talk about something physically. But what this doesn't do, this discounts what people's individual circumstances are, because if we say, oh yeah, I could go get my mind checked, but there's two common thoughts that come past. The first one that are unhelpful, that prevents people from going and seeking help or taking action. The first one is, oh, I'll be right. I think I can just manage this one and get through it. The second one is, my problems aren't big enough. Someone else has it worse. I can tell you right fucking now, someone's always going to have it worse. Someone's always going to have it better. So we've sort of got to drop that thought. And if I gave you an example of two patients in a hospital, they've both been diagnosed with cancer. Patient A has been given 2 years to live, no more, no less. I would be feeling devastated. I'd probably be feeling angry, sad, all of those things. That's a shit card to be dealt. 2 years to go. Patient B in the hospital bed next to patient A has been given 1 year to live. They'd be devastated. They'd be sad. They'd probably be angry. Again, that's a shit card to be dealt with. So we've got two people here with bad situations. Now, patient A's situation on paper is worse. Patient B's is worse, right? Does that discount patient A's feeling because they've got a slightly better deal? No. Patient A with 2 years to live is still allowed to be upset and still allowed to not like the situation they're in. So that there is a great example of how someone will have it better, someone will have it worse, but we're allowed to look at our individual situation, weigh it up, how's it going through our body, how's it going through our head, and start to talk about and navigate our way out of it because it's relative to us. We can do these sorts of things. And then I like to say, right, now that you know that you can talk about your stuff, talk about what's going through your head, and your problems are worthy and you deserve to be listened to and understood and work through that so you don't carry it with you, is that we compare it to a physical health pain scale. So no matter where you're on that physical health pain scale, whether you're on a 2 or an 8, you want to go get it checked out because the 8s can become pretty nasty and chronic quickly. So get it checked out, looked at. Same, and with the 2s, we don't want them becoming 3s, 4s, and 5s because if they do, they could quickly become an 8. Or if we let the 2s add up and compound, that could get worse and worse. So let's think about our mental health in the same way, like a scale. Whether you're on a 2 or an 8 out of 10 on that scale, you want to get it checked out. The 8s, you want to get that checked out because you're living with that. You want to get past it. You don't want it to get worse. And the 2s, what if you let these 2s remain? They can become a 3, a 4, or a 5, or compound. So let's look at the 2s now and treat them early, get them done before they become overwhelming, before they become something that you can't manage. And this is what I want to give people the confidence to is you've got this level here to know that it is normal to talk about this stuff if we think about it that way. So go ahead and just start them. And I understand that these conversations are hard to start. And I had these predicaments when I would go in and out of therapy and I'd be thinking, oh, fuck, here we go. Same old Jack rocking up to therapy with the same old problems. What is she going to say? And every time this happened, the greetings would be different, but the sentiment was same. Hi, Jack. It's so good to see you again. It's great to hear your voice. Hey, what can I help you out with? Unjudgmental, unbiased sort of things. Now, we don't need therapists to talk to because our friends and family, they're going to know us better than a therapist ever will. I just don't think there's any harm in putting your hand up and starting these conversations without anything else except for the understanding that they're not about perfection, they're about practice. And waiting around for someone to ask us if we're okay is fine, but it might not happen. I think the power where we can all get better and we can all normalize these conversations is if we can put our hand up first because, Singy, if you put your hand up and said that you've got some issues you want to talk to me about them, mate, I'm here for you. Just the same if I put my hand up. I know you do that for me. So why are we not expecting someone to do that for us if we don't put our hands up? So I think what I'm pushing is that this is about practice. We'll never get them right. This is about practice, not perfection. So just go and do it.
So then after Ellie's passing, you obviously went through a grieving stage, as would have a lot of people in her immediate community and wider community. Who was the first person you spoke to about your grief? Because it wouldn't have been the therapist.
Well, my very, very first therapist I was speaking to, had lined up to go and speak to her about mental health and mental illness. But before the first session, Ellie had died. So I went in knowing that Ellie had died.
Hold on. So you're already going to seek to see someone for your own mental health?
Yeah. And
then you had made that appointment before Ellie's passing?
Yeah. So I took it upon myself to go and find out what mental illness is, what suicide is. This is what my girlfriend's going through. It's been a pretty tough 3 months and we're talking about like some real confronting stuff about self-harm and potential suicide plans and that sort of thing. So I'm like, I need to go and talk to someone about what it is. I can't
Right.
find these answers. So I went to go and see a therapist, but before my first session, Ellie had died. So that first session was really about grieving and grief and what it is, as well as the fact-finding stuff about mental illness and suicide.
Do you ever have the thoughts, and I know, having spoken to a previous guest, that sometimes this happens where you could do something about it, or you didn't look at it through the right lens, or you at some way, shape or form had control over what the event could have been. Did those thoughts ever cross your mind at all? And if they did, how did you deal with them?
I think I was lucky that I had this therapist from almost day dot.
Yeah.
And they were very, really good at explaining what mental illness and suicide is. And no one person could have caused that for Ellie. Sometimes, it can be an imbalance of chemicals in the brain, but essentially suicide is when a person's mental anguish and hardships are so overwhelming that they feel like taking their life is their only way out of that immense pain. So once I started to understand that, there was never any blame or finger pointing, and people, it's just such a sneaky disease in that I'm conscious here that I also don't want to use the wrong language around it being a sneaky disease, which will sneak around the person, which helps them sneak around other people to go and seek their, to escape this pain. So maybe we have to look at this one. But if there is a suicide plan in action, sometimes it is very, very, very difficult to stop. So blaming myself for Ellie was never on the cards because I'd had such great support and explanation from the start.
Yeah, that's incredibly difficult. And you said about it being almost sneaky or an insidious thing, and you saw someone went from bubbly life of the party to all of a sudden having that change, and quite a visible change. Can you think of any explanation as to why that change happened so rapidly? Because it's something where we all have groups of mates, and if there are signs or symptoms that we as mates can pick up on early, obviously it helps us being able to address it fast as mates, right? Sometimes, like you said, if you're feeling like your thoughts are coming into play and you aren't able to address them in 1 day, 2 days or 7 days, then you have a responsibility to yourself. But as friends, we also have responsibility to one another. So when you reflect back on it, were there signs or symptoms, or in your learnings post Ellie's passing, are there signs and symptoms that we can look for in order to say, that's not normal behavior? Maybe let's just ask a question.
Yeah, it's great. And I think if we zoom out and get forensic on it, of Ellie's last 3 months, probably, or even before then, before she became really sick, but they're hard to pick. And like that's the value of hindsight and picking apart all the minutes and all the moments when they're gone. But finding those out and getting them at the right time in the right place to find that as a cry for help, they're tough, or signs that they're planning something. An example that my old man was just telling me about recently is one of his mates died from suicide when we were quite young as kids. And he remembers his mate saying, "Oh, you'd look after the family and kids if something ever happened to me." And my old man's like, "Yeah, for sure." But then once his mate died by suicide, it clicked. It's like he wasn't asking like if he ever got hit by a car or a bus, would dad look after the family? He was planning. He was making sure that his ducks were in the row for when he was no longer here to look after his own family. So, yeah, fucking oath, we can get forensic on it. But doing it day in, day out, conversation by conversation, it's really hard. It's really hard. Can we get better at asking our mates if we're okay? I think we're really good at that. Can we get better at drilling down into that conversation by saying something like, hey, are you okay? I've noticed that you've been really busy at work, or you've been kind of short with the pets. It's not usually you. Is there something you want to talk about? And we start to question the behavior, not the person, or ask about the behavior, not the person. So we come across in a non-attacking way and try and really calmly bring this conversation into the questions into a conversation that can help and bring out some unhelpful thoughts or emotions that they're having about a situation. But man, like, we can do all the asking in the world, but the real power is if we can put our own hand up and say, I need it, because the guessing goes out of it. The speed, the call to action is so quick, because you can put your hand up, say, I need help with this. I'm really struggling. This is why I've got you guys as friends. This is why I've got you as family. I need your help with this now. As much as we can get better and better at asking others if we're okay, sometimes it's so hard to pick up on, because the masking and the pretending and the faking it is something that people get really, really good at. We've all done it. We've all pretended that we're okay.
Yeah. You know, you spoke about bottling up emotions, and obviously that everyone does that to some extent, because, you know, you're trying to figure out whether this thought or this emotion that's playing on you is something that is going to be a small little effect on your life, or something that's going to snowball, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that was coming across my mind when you were talking then was around, well, if the emotions that you're feeling are at, let's say, there's like a 3 or 4 out of 10, at what stage do you put your hand up and go, I don't want this to get to a 7?
Yeah.
Versus I'm going to self-inquire and just see how I go, because you don't want to be, or not, sorry, I don't want to say that. You don't want to be. There will be people that will almost be the person that cries wolf all the time. There'll be other people that need it, that don't do it. So I'm just trying to find out where that happy medium is for people.
Yep.
And obviously some people reach out on social media, some people reach out face to face. Is there thoughts that come into your mind or emotions that come up where they are more triggering or more worrying than maybe an individual thinks?
That's probably pretty subjective, but to your point about how do we know when to start them, or how can we start them, and where's that happy medium? I think and like I said, this is about practice, not perfection. This sounds a bit wild, but I do this all the time, and people do this in a journaling perspective. People journal their thoughts to see what they come out like on paper, and that changes your chain of thought, changes how it feels in your mind, because it's something different. It's on paper, and that stream of consciousness potentially lets it come out a bit differently. That to me is a great start of practicing. Same as my thing is speaking out loud in the car about something and speaking out loud in the shower. Probably not the best one to do walking down the street, but they're great ways to practice, because it does come out differently when you say things out loud. But I feel like, again, let's not rely on those ones, because we have other people to help us through these things. I'm not saying that they're going to solve our issues, but they're there to bounce ideas off if we need it. And just starting these conversations could be simply like, hey, I've been having this funny thought for a couple of days. It might seem silly or it might seem small, but can I just bounce some ideas off you? These mental health conversations don't need to be, hey, I need to book in this 2:00 meeting with you for a one-on-one. I've got some stuff to chat to you about. Like, it doesn't flow. Like, it doesn't mean that we can relax about it. Like, I know how serious mental health and mental illness should be taken, but we don't have to take it seriously all the time. They can have serious consequences, but it doesn't have to be taken seriously all the time. A lot of people get rigid around it, and there's this black cloud and obviously a stigma that hangs around it. But if we're going to treat it that way, like this beast or animal or whatever, then we're never going to get comfortable talking about these things where just having like a real informal chat about something that's been on your mind for a few days with a mate could just help you come up with a different way to think about it. They might have been through something similar, and you get to bond and connect that way, which I think is a really nice thing to do, and to have a connection like that with mates.
Has a mate ever come up to you, now that you've spoken about your story for a while and confided in you? And then how did you deal with that? Because that's also an art and a skill is, to be able to hold a container or a space for your friend to be able to come up and tell you something for which they may feel very vulnerable about bringing up. So has that happened to you? And in your experience, what is the best way for you to be able to listen, provide insight or advice when someone comes up to you?
Yep.
With, hey, I've got some weird fucking thoughts going on here.
And I think this is an awesome question. And because I think we're not having mental health conversations for two main reasons. One, we don't know how to start them, and we don't know how to respond. And the responding thing is easier than everyone thinks. But yes, I have had people, mates and otherwise, confide in me over the journey, and still do. But I confide in them as well. Like, this is a two-way street. This is just how it works as mates with me. I've had mates confide in me about work stress, family stress, relationship stress. 2 years ago, one of my really good mates, I've seen him as like an older brother. His partner died. She died of cancer. And almost to the day, a couple of years later, that Ellie, my girlfriend, died. So he's like, what is this? What are we going through? Like, this is fucked. And obviously could see him grieving and know that he's going through the depths of it, and didn't offer any advice, but was just there for him to know that he could talk to me about what was going through. But we would often talk about that he's probably in survival mode, and what do we need to do to get out of survival mode, or to maintain ourselves during survival mode, and just take baby steps. Get that day done, or get that half day out of the hospital done, get the full day done the next day, get the week done, and what do we need to do to get through that period and through that heavy, heavy grief. So there's obviously that, and we were talking about, doing things, and whether it was, because no one ever wrote the book on how someone grieves for someone else. So, but try and be kind to yourself, and do the things that get you through the day. If you need to run. If you need to paint. Whatever you need to do it, to get through that day and push through it, do that, because that grief will always be there. If we respect the grief and carry it with us, which is a healthy thing to do, because if we don't carry the grief, we're not carrying the person with us, and that's disrespectful for the person that was in our lives and so important for us. So it's like, what do we need to do to get through it? And it's always going to be there. So don't feel guilty if you're actually having fun, or laughing at a movie, or enjoying a game of sport, because that grief is going to be there. We can't hold on to it forever. So I sort of got sidetracked there, but yeah, no. That's exactly what I was helping Brendan with. And in terms of responding to someone else's cry for help or request for help about putting their hand up and say they're struggling, I think we can really simplify it by asking ourselves, well, what would we want? And if you came to me with stress about work and a relationship, and you poured your heart out for half an hour, 45 minutes, and then I just said, oh, have you tried this, this, and this? That's what I would do. That discounts just the 45 minutes you've told me stuff. Probably the week, month, years you've been carrying this stuff around and thinking about it, thinking that I can solve it in a couple of steps. No, I can't. And that's not very fair on what you're going through. So the best thing that we can do if we're listening to someone about a mental health conversation is let them talk and actively listen. So we want to hear them, and we want to respond to them with what they've said in our own words. And it does two things. It makes sure that we understand. And the most important thing, it makes sure that they know that we've understood and we've listened and we've heard them and they're understood and they're validated. From there, we can start to ask questions about what they're going through, how they're feeling, and start probing a little bit within boundaries, of course. If they get overwhelmed or upset, then we sort of have to tone it back. So all we're doing right now is listening and asking sensible, sensitive questions. Then the final step, all you have to do at the end of it is ask the person, hey, do you want to keep chatting? Do you want to leave it there? And do you want my help to make a plan with anything? And then you let the other person decide how the rest of that conversation goes, because that could be then and there, that could be done. Or it could be, no, I need to keep chatting, or no, I need your help making a plan. And that takes all the confusion out of it. It takes no guesswork. We ask the right questions and they're going to tell us what help they need, because people, we're all fucking resourceful. We can all probably fix our own stuff on our own, but sometimes we just need a bit of help. We need some ideas. We need to get things off our chest because life's really fucking hard, but we're trying to all do it alone. Mm-hmm. So let's have these conversations and get it out there where, we don't have to be perfect. There's no such thing, but admit that we're not perfect and start to untangle some unhelpful thoughts with our friends and let them know that you trust them with this information and they can trust you back by holding it and having that space for them as well.
So just to summarize that, because I think that's super powerful, because after this conversation, you may have inspired one bloke to go out there and speak to a mate, and another person listening to this conversation might be that mate, right? So upon going back through what you said, if you're the person receiving the information that a friend's going through a hard time, one, better for you to listen more than talk. Two, after they've said everything they need to say, question and ask, are there any other things that you haven't quite said that you've wanted to say? Because for them, they may have given you 80% of the story, want to suss you out, and they go, fuck, okay, really, there's another 20%.
Yep.
And so that would be the next step for you. And then finally, once that's all done and on the table, you go, would you like to leave it there? Would you like to touch base about this at another point? Do you want to make a plan together? And based off what they're saying, you can then go, cool. And it doesn't have to be all on that day.
100%, man. And I think also admit, mate, or just let them know, thank you so much for trusting me with that information. That sounds shit. That sounds like a hard time, but I'm here for you because one day you're going to be there for me. And know that it goes two ways. It's you're allowed to do this. This is how friendships should work, and this is how we should be bonding on some occasions. And then another powerful one is in a week's time, touch base. Hey mate, how you going? Don't forget it. Don't brush it under the rug, because all that hard work and heavy lifting and that vulnerability and the listening's been done. That's the good shit. Let's build on that. And by a text message a week later to get the feelings going again, and whether it's good, bad or ugly, what a great way to just start it again and keep navigating it together.
I think there was an interesting conversation that I heard literally on a podcast in the last week, and they were talking about people taking responsibility of their mental health, a little bit like what you're saying. And they go, well, if you go to one therapist and it doesn't work, especially for your mental health, a lot of people leave it there. But if people go, I'm a podiatrist, if people go to a podiatrist, a physiotherapist, an osteopath, and they don't get the results, they'll generally go somewhere else to try and see, because they know there's different philosophies and ways to deal with this thing. So I think it's the same thing with friendships. You might think that one friend might be capable of listening based off your prior experience. However, you might find that friend is not necessarily who they are when shit hits the fan in that circumstance, which is okay. That happens. But you might just ask them to hold on to that sensitive information, just go leave it there, and you might decide to speak to someone else. And I think a lot of people, sometimes if they get brave enough to talk to one person, if it doesn't work, they go, fucking tried it.
Yep.
I tried it.
Yep.
Too hard. And then they go back into that cycle of bottling, bottling, too hard. With your timeline after Ellie, obviously you've gone through a lot and you've worked on yourself exponentially to get yourself to a stage where, as you've mentioned, you still have a very good, a lovely place for her in your heart, but you also don't feel guilty or have any problems celebrating your life, going out there, living it. What are the key lessons that you found to be able to make that transition? Because some people live with that guilt forever.
Yep. Just to your point before about opening up to a therapist and it not working, I would think about it. If it doesn't work on the first go and then you're out the door, never to come back again, I would just think of it like a Netflix series. You probably watch one episode, but you're like, oh shit, maybe it'll get good in the second, or someone said it would get good in the third, so I'll keep going. I would try that. And then just if you got halfway through the season of that show, you're like, this show's not for me, I'm going to go try another show. Go and try another therapist. Go and try it. And then in terms of talking to your friends, no one is going to give you 100% of your needs. Not your mom, dad, brother, sister, partner.
That's great.
So you don't have to get everything you require from the one person. So don't be afraid to go and shop around. Shop around and find those people, because some mates in my friendship group, I've got them and we can talk about anything. Then there's people who this friendship group will never see, don't even know their names, but I can talk to that person out there about all of my mental health, all of the spiritual stuff, whatever it is, and they give it back to me. You can just go find those people wherever they are and use them. And when it comes to talking about the weather and footy and cars or jobs or whatever, that stuff all goes on. And then some people get it, some people don't. I've got mates that I talk to about sport, but other mates, they hate sport. So why would I talk to a person about my mental health when they hate mental health? It's not our job to change people's minds. They can do that on their own. It's for us to go and seek out the other mental health advocates in our life and go and have those conversations, because they're going to seek another one and they're going to seek another one. Then your next question about, sorry, I forgot.
Key lessons. So the key,
about grief.
Well, about not holding on. Like, you still obviously have a deep place for Ellie in your heart and the experiences that you've had with her, but also you've gotten to a stage where you're able to celebrate, go out, not feel guilty about enjoying your life as it is now. What were the key lessons to enable you to go from that sort of maybe guilt or sadness or despair to your first night out with the boys, having a laugh, not even thinking about it?
Yeah. It's a bit of a cliche one, but like a time heals all wounds thing. I'm not denying that it does get easier as time goes on. But a good analogy I like to think of with grief is if you have life and life is in a box and grief is a ball. And during those early stages, that grief ball takes up most of the box of you getting on with life. And that big grief ball is hitting your life often because it's so big and it's interrupting your life, and that pang of grief comes out of nowhere. But as time goes on, the ball gets smaller and smaller. So grief is becoming smaller and smaller, and it starts to get some air within the box. That doesn't mean that grief has gone away. It means it's slowly going away and potentially dying down, but it still bounces around this box, and it eventually will hit the box, aka you getting on with your life. And that pain you feel is still the pain of grief. It's still the confusion, it's still the sadness, it's still the memories, it's still the heartache, it's still the pining for them. But it just doesn't happen as often. So that helped me, and I didn't learn that till very recently either, but that has helped me sort of figure out what is grief. Because grief, it's confusing, it's painful, it's hard, and we try and get comfort in it however we can. But it's one of those things where I've learned is that you have to respect the grief. This parking of grief that I did backfired on me big time. I've done a full circle on it, as I explained earlier, but we've got to respect the grief. Feel sad when you need to be sad. If you need to take the intentional break, take the intentional break, and draw the line with reckless behavior. So I would be saying like drinking and drug taking, or maybe even driving while you're quite upset.
Now, I'm not going to say that there's any comparison or even close to, let's say, being broken up with and losing someone you've loved, or being divorced with, to losing your partner, full stop.
Yep.
Okay. However, there are men that have gone through a lot of that, but maybe not have gone to the extent which you've gone to, which is to lose your partner. And one of the biggest things they struggle with is going back out there and dating.
Yep.
Now, obviously, that is something that you have had to do since losing Ellie. Was it 10 years ago now?
10 years, yep.
10 years ago now. What and when did you first start dating, and how did those first few dates go? Because there'll be a lot of men that are heartbroken or have been heartbroken that maybe haven't really gone back out there again because they can't compute what to do or how to do it.
Yeah, I think just on your first point about being broken up with, like, grief traditionally is about someone that's died, but grief can happen in many different forms. And I was speaking to a grief counsellor earlier in the week about what she does. And grief, you can grieve old relationships or relationships that have been and gone. You can grieve, even if you change jobs, like you can grieve that old job. Like, let's not, we can sort of muddy waters here, I suppose, but like that is a type of yearning of something that you used to have. That is a version of grief. Now, how much out of 10 that grief hurts, that's up to you, because some people will be fucking heartbroken after getting broken up with, or if they lose their job, they might have loved that job and now they grieve that old life that they had. So getting broken up with or breakups are fucking hard. It's no matter which side you're on on side of the fence you're on, they're difficult. But getting back out there, I suppose, yeah, I did meet someone like not long after. And it was great. It met a lot of needs, but then just getting back out there was, I think obviously difficult.
Yeah.
And it's sort of known around friendships and stuff. So it wasn't like I was hiding anything anyway. The story was already out there. But for someone that's getting back on the horse and getting out there, and maybe if I could draw a better example of when I had been in a relationship and got broken up with someone, is that, I had a choice with my time. Do I want to sit on the couch or do I want to go and try and meet people? Or, when that eventually ran its race, when I'd been dating for a while, it's like, okay, well, what do I want to do now? And I'd pull myself back off the dating scene and have the nights on the couch by myself, or spend it with family, or spend it with friends. So it's really just got to be very, very wary of what you need right then and there, and don't go with the flow because that's what you think you need, or that's what people are telling you need, or that's what you should be doing. Just listen to what you need in your head, heart, body, whatever it is.
Over the course of, your 20s to 30s, you said you obviously lost your partner, your dad lost a mate, and we both knew someone at school that passed away a few weeks ago. And obviously this is something that's coming around, unfortunately, in your life fucking far too often. What is it about the close friend that you lost now, and how you're dealing with it is different to how you dealt with it when Ellie passed away?
Yeah, so I've had a lot of time to think about this. And I think losing a partner compared to losing a good mate is there are differences. And losing a partner is, you lose that one where it's most nights you see each other, every day you're calling or texting or sharing memes, like it's 24/7. So there's that heartache that goes with that. Now, after losing a mate, I am equally as devastated for the state of mind that he must have been in, and how sad he must have been, and how upset, same as Ellie. I'm equally as devastated for the family, just like I was devastated for Ellie's family. Those things are so equal. And in terms of how I've behaved, I am now, unfortunately, have to practice what I've been preaching, or what I've learned, is that you got to respect the grief. and you're allowed to respect the grief, and you're allowed to be sad when you feel sad, because that constant is now gone. And that sucks. That's heartbreaking. So as different as those two deaths were from a relationship perspective, they share a lot of similarities in the feelings that come with it. And there'll be a moment where I'll have to grieve again for a completely different person, and that grief will probably be different in another way.
I guess at some point in time, our time is all expired, and sadly, people leave our lives, and at some point, someone will have to deal with grief in their life, and so, I think the tools and the things that we've spoken about in terms of how to understand grief is bloody important, because everyone should know the ways in which we can go about looking after ourselves from a preventative perspective. And in the case of something where something has occurred and you had a seed of emotions coming up as a result of something, or losing something, a previous job, partner, or circumstance that you are attached to in some way, shape or form. I guess the final thing I've got for you, Jack, is sort of around the idea of, is there anything that we haven't spoken about today that your message, It's Cool to Cry, stands for, that you'd like to bring up and discuss, so that the people that are listening can get the most out of you and the most out of your story?
Steve, I reckon your questions have been really good. I've got most of what I wanted to say off my chest, but I just really want people to understand that you're allowed to put your hand up if you're not going great.
Yeah.
And reiterate that don't hold these conversations in because you're afraid of making a mistake. Mistakes are fine. Holding it in isn't. So find the person, find the avenue, find the notebook and the pen, or find the car, or find the shower to start having these things out loud, having these conversations out loud, and move the needle. Yeah. And if you need help doing this, something that really helped me over the journey is something called the feels wheel or the emotions wheel. And you can go to itscooltocry.com, free to download. Essentially, it's a tool that has the big intense emotions in the middle. And on average, we only know 3 emotions: happy, sad, and angry. So if we're describing our whole life with those 3 emotions, it's going to get pretty repetitive and it's not accurate. So if we can use tools like this, which has 130 emotions on it, we can better identify and articulate how we're feeling. And this has 2 main benefits. One is it helps our brain calm the intensity of the emotions. So it takes it from our emotional brain and into our rational brain. We get to make better decisions and navigate our way through that circumstance or that situation better. The second part is what I'm really hammering home, is it helps us have better and more meaningful conversations with people around us. That's what I would be reiterating, is go and have these conversations.
Yeah. Jack, if someone wants to find you, they find that, they understand your story and they think that your story would be beneficial within their personal life, in their community, in their workplace. I know you do some workshops out there as well. How can they contact you, and what's your social handles or ways in which people can reach out?
Yeah, cool. There's a contact us page at itscooltocry.com. Just address it to me because I'm a one-man band. I'll bloody find it. I'll probably write back to you in 3 seconds. And if you want to hit us up on the socials, it's at itscool_to-cry. And if you feel like wearing It's Cool to Cry, please do. If my designs aren't in your wheelhouse, go and buy something else from one of the other great mental health clothing brands out there. There's Livin', Shaka Project, Cooper Chapman. If you don't like any of their stuff either, go buy from Homey or go buy from Clothing the Gaps, because the more we can support small Aussie businesses that are trying to make a difference, the better off we're all going to be for it.
You're a good man. Thanks for coming on.
You too. Thanks, brother. Thank you
Right
very
on,
much.
brother.
Good on you, mate.
Good on you.